Hello, my name is Darryl, President of Vacuum Pressing Systems. In this video, I am going to talk about and demonstrate what I call the outside technique. So what do I mean by this? And I'm going to start this by talking about curved work, because this is what a vacuum press stands out in a way that other systems really can't touch. There's lots of great presses on the market that will do flat work, but curved work is a completely different challenge. You're either going to have to do male or female forms, or lots and lots of clamping. Getting uniform pressure is a problem. With a vacuum press, you can both veneer and laminate quite easily. And there's sort of two ways to go at this. One way is that the form that you're bending things on, and I'm really talking more about the laminating part, less about the veneering part right now, and that is you would take the form that you make and slide it in the bag with the laminations and then draw a vacuum. And this is great for smaller size things. When forms get really large, like an arch jamb or other things, and I'm going to demonstrate two different methods about doing this outside technique, it is hard to get it in the bag. Not only does the form get extremely heavy, it's just hard and unwieldy. So we do what's called the outside technique. What this means is that only the laminations go in the bag and the form stays outside the bag, and then you manually bend the laminations to the form, hold them in position, and then run the vacuum up to full pressure, and it squeezes it in that position. And this works really great for certain types of things and not so well for other types of things. And what I mean by that is, let's say, for example, you have a curved drawer front like this one, but it's inset, so it insets into the frame, which means the reveals all the way around the frame and the door have to match really well. And for that level of accuracy, I recommend that you go in the bag, so use the inside technique. But something like that arch jamb that I showed, that doesn't have to be super precise, and it'll actually be quite accurate, but it's not as precise as in the bag. But an arch jamb, you have a little bit of play. So that's the ideal application for the outside technique. So with that in mind, I'm going to set up, and we're going to demonstrate the outside technique on that arch jamb. So here we are, ready to start the process. I have the bag, and in this case, a long, narrow bag is a lot easier than using a panel type bag. I call this a laminating bag. Our 4 laminations here, and 2 methods of air evacuation. This is netting, which has a coarse weave that the air can trickle down, and this is what I call a flexible platen. It's like a regular platen that you do flat work with, but in this case, it's on a piece of 3/8 bendable plywood. So you have the grooves and the exit hole, but it's a flexible platen, which I prefer because the air really travels these grooves more efficiently and quicker than it does in the netting. But the netting is easier. You don't have to cut and make these grooves. But we're going to do it with the flexible platen. And the way we're going to start this process is this will go on top of here like this, right? And then, and I love stretch wrap, we will simply, once the glue gets applied, we'll just wrap this around and a couple times and put it in the bag, like so. So now we have a nice sandwich ready to go, and I'll do it on the other end as well. I've got the laminations and the flexible platen in the bag, and I just need to connect the hose to the flexible platen. On a side note, this is a bag I've had for a long time, and at one point the nipple got damaged, and that's easily replaced with a nipple patch kit. I don't know if you can see it in the video, but this nipple has a flange, so you can cut out the old nipple, and glue a new nipple on, and the bag's as good as new. So anyway, so let's get the brass fitting through there and then put it right into the platen. And I will put the closure on, and then I'll draw a light vacuum and put it up on the form. I wanted to take a moment and explain this drawing a light vacuum and why it's important to do so. If you just take the laminations and put them up on the form on the outside technique and start to bend it, the laminations might have gaps as you clamp it at both ends on the form. And then when you draw a vacuum, they don't come together. Where if you draw a light vacuum, now all the laminations are tight against each other. I like to say it's like shrink wrapped. But the key is you don't want too little vacuum, otherwise the laminations can come apart a little bit. And you don't want full vacuum or high vacuum because it'll grab it so hard, it'll be hard to bend it. So you want this lower vacuum, I say around 10 inches of mercury on the gauge. So wanted to give you that overview of that part, and then we'll take a close-up of drawing this light vacuum I'm talking about. So let's go to it. All right, I have the closure on the bag and the pump is hooked up. Let's draw a light vacuum. And this will happen quite quickly. There it is. That's all you need to do. All right, the next step is we'll put it up on the form and clamp it into position. I was setting up to do the arch jam, and I noticed that this is my flexible 3/8 platen board, and I had put the hole right at the end, and I need to put a clamp there. So I did another one, and I moved the connection hole up a little bit so I could put a clamp here. So I wanted you to see that before I got started. So now we'll go back and set up the arch jam. Here we are with the arch jam set up on the table. I've actually screwed this to the table so it doesn't flop around, and I put one clamp in the middle with a block. So I'm going to start by pushing this down and putting a clamp here, and then I'll put another clamp there. And one thing which might be obvious is I decided for this demonstration I didn't put any glue on. It doesn't change how it's done, and it makes it a lot less stressful. So I have the light vacuum, and I'm going to go ahead and bend this down. And what you will see is, because this is a true arc, this will automatically stay quite tight to this. It doesn't come out and do anything like this. If it was an oval, that'd be a different story. But for a true radius, it will hug the form pretty well. So I'm going to get started and push this down. So I got this all in position. You saw me doing this side. I didn't give you the visual of the other side because it's more of the same. And once everything is in position, then this center clamp is not necessary. And I'll bring it in closer so you can see that it hugs the form quite tightly. Before I forget, and before I show you an up close of the laminations, let's make sure we run the pump up to full vacuum. Now, I'm running this in continuous run mode just for a little bit, 30 seconds, a minute. And the reason is that long narrow bags, the air struggles to get all the way down to the pump as fast as the pump wants to pull it. So I will run the pump just for a little while in continuous run mode and then turn it to auto cycle, and it stabilizes more. And you'll see this is going to drop down a little bit right away. And then it will stabilize, so it'll stabilize around 25 and then go down slowly. This is an old bag, so it's still going to leak. But that gives you an idea of the value of letting it run in continuous run mode for a minute or two. So I'll pull the bag back a little bit, And you can see that it really is right up against the form with just two clamps, one on this end, one on the other, and the one in the middle temporarily. So that is how you do this arch jamb outside technique. And we're going to go on to a slightly different idea where there's some flat and curved, so it's a combination, a little more complicated. And we'll take it from there. In this demonstration, I'm going to utilize this form to lay up a waterfall table. And why I chose this particular idea is that we're combining a curve with a flat. And there's a little issue with putting the two together, so I chose this. And what I'm going to do now is show you what happens at the transition point from curve to straight, which is the more complicated part that we have to deal with. So let's go to a close-up so you can see how this goes. I have this piece of 3/8 bendable ply clamped here to demonstrate what I mean about the transition point. So if I pull down on this, right away, this wants to bulge upwards at this point. So anytime you go from a curve to a straight, you have to deal with the fact that it wants to do this at that transition point. Now I'm going to set out the materials for the actual waterfall table itself. Have you look at that. Then I'm going to set up the form and get ready to actually do the pressing. So let's have a closer look. All right, so I'm using 3/8 bendable plywood, 3 layers for the table itself, and I will use the netting this time. So we're just going to put a strip down the middle. It's not really critical that it be the whole width, as long as you have, something down the middle. And then I will use stretch wrap to shrink wrap everything together like I did before. And then we have the bag, a little bit wider bag this time. One thing I'm not doing here is I would put a piece of veneer between these layers. You're only talking 2 glue lines, which isn't a lot, although yes, there would be one on the front and the back with the face veneer. But I always, between bendable plywood, I usually put a veneer. Now this is bird's eye maple, so I probably wouldn't use that, but I would recommend veneer between each of these 2 layers. But again, this is just to demonstrate the outside technique. So I'm not going to use glue. I'm not going to put the veneer in between. I just want you to see how this goes on the form. So I'm going to get all of this in the bag set up, and then we'll take it from there. So we have this all ready to go. I have the bendable plywood in the bag. I have a light vacuum that I've drawn on this, so it's stiff. You can see it's sticking out fairly straight there. The additional piece I haven't talked about is you really want to have a board that goes on top that would go up here and sit right about there. And these blocks are screwed on so that when I go to clamp it, it'll be a lot easier than trying these to slide around. And in this case, I just happen to have some shipping material that is a 1-inch honeycomb. It's fairly rigid material as the board. Most of you would use regular plywood for this. So that's how that goes. And there's also shorter pieces to go on the end here. So that's how that is. Now, before I actually do this, I want to take a slight detour into the glue. For this application, I would not use a yellow or a white glue, your standard PVA, for 2 reasons. One, they don't have a long open work time, and they tack, especially, this is already being squeezed by vacuum a little bit, and it's going to lock this up and make it really hard for me to bend it down. So I strongly recommend using a urea resin, either the powder you mix with water or the liquid you mix with a powder. Our company does carry the liquid you mix with powder, My main reason for that is it has long open work time and it has no tack. So this squeeze effect will not cause trouble. So with that said, I am going to go ahead and start the bending process, and you can see how that happens. I decided you really didn't need to watch me clamp this call board on top, so I just went ahead and did that. But now we're going to go on to this part, which is the important part, and it's just a matter of pressing that. You can see it kind of holds as you do this, so the stiffness of it, right, it's kind of like that. So it really almost moves into position. So this is the tricky part here, is to put this on here. Here's a close-up of the curve, and you can see, take a look there, you can see that it hugs it quite nicely. And now that it's in position, I would run the vacuum up to full and let it sit overnight. So here it is all clamped up, both ends and the top. I would let this sit overnight for a good cure. As I said before, I'm using urea resin here. You could use epoxy and you could use polyurethane because neither one of them have tack and they have long open work time. They tend to be really messy to work with, so I wouldn't do it for this. But anyway, that's it, all set up. And this is basically concludes the outside technique in these two examples. Here's an interesting detail. I've taken all the clamps off, as you can see here, and slid this off. And just, I have no glue on this. This is just a demonstration run. But the vacuum squeezes it so hard that if you look here, it really hugs the shape. Now, I would still leave it on the form, but it's interesting the nature of vacuum and how aggressively it will squeeze all the laminations together. Thought you'd be interested in seeing that. I'm going to do one little short, interesting vacuum demo here, which is I'm just going to watch this. I am going to unplug the vacuum, right? Take a minute, and this will just collapse. And that is the power of vacuum. One last thing I wanted to repeat, and that is when I drew down the vacuum to full, not when I just turned it on to get an initial drawdown, but when I turned it on to full, I ran the pump in continuous run mode, which overrides the sensing switch. So I let it run 2, 3, 4 minutes or whatever. And the reason you do this is, especially with the EvacuNet, the air sort of trickles down to the exit hole. And if you put it in auto cycle, the pump thinks it's at full vacuum, shuts off, more air comes down to the exit hole and to the pump, and the pump kicks back on. And this sort of goes on, off, as it's continuing to draw the air out. Where you put it in continuous run mode, and it just runs and overrides the switch until pretty much all the air is out. Then you throw it in auto cycle mode, and it will stay off until it really needs to recycle. So just be aware of that is pretty much always the thing to do in the outside technique. So with that said, this concludes this video. I hope that you understand the outside technique better, and these two examples give you ideas of how you can use it in this way. It clearly saves great big giant heavy forms, and there's a real place for it. So If you ever have questions, you can always call us. We're here, and we'll see you soon in another video.